Hey, European history students. This is a um, lecture on the Italian revolutions of 1848, but I also wanted to quickly address the third kind of essay that you might face, the third LEQ um, prompt that you might face on the final exam. It is the change and continuity over time essay. And, like the first two, like the compare and contrast essay and like the causation essay, we're looking for basically three paragraphs. The first paragraph, like the other two, is going to be your contextualization of about 5 sentences describing the prompt. Or the contextualization surrounding the prompt, and then getting to your thesis, where you would say, this is something that changed over time in this way, and this is something that stayed continuous or didn't change over this period of time. And then you're going to divide your essay into two different paragraphs. The first one being, well, I'm not sure really. You could do change first, you could do continuity first, either way. But remember that your change paragraph, just like your change argument, has a beginning. What's it like in the beginning? What is it like in the middle? And what is it like at the end? Probably. It doesn't have to be a continuum. It doesn't have to be nobles losing power during that period of time. It could be nobles being powerful and then losing power in the middle and then regaining power or something like that. But a beginning, a middle, and end for the change part of your essay, and then also the continuity. Things don't really change from 1500 to 1815 in this way, because what you had in 1500 was this information, and then what you have in 1800 is basically the same thing going on. Hopefully that finishes things up for us, and we know how to write the three different essays, and hopefully whatever essay it comes up, two different prompts. I'm going to give you two different prompts to choose from. You can organize it well so that you can have a good thesis, and that you can earn the point for doing the change in continuity, or doing the causation, or doing the compare and contrast. Remember, that is one of the 6 ways of getting a point on the essay. Let's move on to the revolutions in the Italian states in 1848. I sometimes feel guilty about spending so much time on the Germans and so little time on the Italians, when their 1848 revolutions are pretty similar, and then their process of unification is fairly similar. But I'm going to tell you that it's not just because I'm a German American and have an ancestor who fought in the 1848 revolutions on the losing side and came to the United States afterwards. But I think it's because the history of the German people is going to be much more disruptive, or much more pushing the history of Europe forward, as opposed to the Italians, who really had their heyday, I think, in the Renaissance. Sorry if you're an Italian American. So here are the Italian states in 1848. Remember, Piedmont, Sardinia is kind of where we want to focus our attention. It's that green territory. Sardinia is the island, and then Piedmont with Savoy and Nice and so on, and Genoa. That's all part of this Kingdom of Piedmont, Sardinia that had been created in 1815 by the Congress of Vienna. Florence is still there in Tuscany, but really Rome as part of the Papal States. The Papal States are a central belt of territory on the Italian peninsula, very important, controlled secularly by the Pope. And then if you look at the northern part, where we have Lombardy and Venetia, those are territories that the Austrian Empire was holding on to. So the Kingdom of Piedmont, Sardinia, like I said, it was the buffer state. The Papal States are there. There's the Kingdom of the Two Sicilies. Sadly, I'm never particularly impressed with them. They're always kind of a backwater. And then Lombardy and Venetia, both under the control of the Habsburgs. And then Tuscany, which is the territory surrounding Florence, is really not so much as important as it was during the Renaissance. Well, Milan and Venetia, if you remember from the lecture on the Habsburg Empire, broke free from Habsburg control. And in central Italy, this is including places like the Papal States. In central Italy, peasants demanded land and workers demanded economic help. You've got people at the bottom of society who are suffering, once again, from bad harvests and a bad economy, and they want help immediately. I suppose they're going to be, fairly radical until they get well, for the Italian peasants, the land that they want, and for workers, probably more socialist-minded kinds of policies that might give them higher wages and bring them cheaper food. I should remind you, though, or I should say that peasants and workers are oftentimes at odds with one another economically. One wanting high food prices or high crop prices, and the other one wanting low crop prices or low food prices. Just like everywhere else in 1848, the rulers were kind of taken aback by these revolutions that are happening, by the demands that are being made upon them. They're looking at France and the German states and the Habsburg Empire, all of these different places where the rulers are just giving in, and the rulers of the Italian states were giving in as well. And so they were giving constitutions to their subjects. They were starting to move towards greater liberalism. And then, just like in the German states, there is this idea of, well, how about a unified Italian state? How could we make that happen? What are some possible ways to do that? Well, just like other places that we've talked about, there are different social classes who want different things. This, I'm sure, reminds you of the Habsburg Empire, of the French and so on. The bourgeoisie, generally throughout Europe in 1848, as propertied people, as educated people, want a more safe, let's say, political system with a constitutional monarch, with classical liberalism, where the people who have property are the ones who get to vote and nobody beneath them gets to vote. The proletariat, meanwhile, the working class, really would rather have a republic. They don't want, one leader with a parliament. They'd rather have, a parliamentary system where you have leaders who are put into power based on their popularity or based on the popular vote. And then social reforms of the kinds that I just talked about, maybe helping people out economically, maybe limiting the number of hours people can work in factories and providing wage minimums and those sorts of things. Well, a problem is that Italy, like Germany, doesn't really exist. These places have to be created, and then in our minds, my mind and your minds, they exist. But at this point in time, Italy is filled with people who speak vastly different kinds of Italian. Their history is really quite different. They really hadn't been a unified whole since the Roman Empire. Most of their history, if you think about it, have been city-states that fight with one another. And then another problem would be, who should the monarch be if a constitutional monarchy is going to happen? Who should that ruler be? Should it be Charles Albert of Piedmont, Sardinia, the most powerful monarchy on the Italian peninsula? Or should it be the Pope? Should it be Pius IX, who is a figure that most all of the Italians could rally around because most all of the Italians are Catholic? Well, those are kind of the two candidates, if you want to think about it that way. In the Kingdom of Piedmont with Sardinia, I kind of mentioned this when talking about the Habsburg Empire. Charles Albert, the King of Piedmont, Sardinia, tried to grab those territories, Lombardy and Venetia, that freed themselves from Austria. And he does this militarily. He's trying to grab more territory for himself. Perhaps, in the back of his mind is the idea that he could unify all of Italy, but it might be a little bit too early for that. Well, once the empire strikes back, once the Austrians kind of get control of themselves, send an Austrian army down to regain Lombardy and Venetia, General Radetzky defeats the Italians, that would be the Lombardies, the Venetians, and these people from Piedmont, Sardinia, in July of 1748. Some time goes by, and Charles Albert tries it again when, I suppose, the Habsburgs have moved their army away to go and deal with the Magyars, try to conquer the Magyars. He tries it again, but once again, in March of 1849, the Habsburg armies are able to defeat the Italians. This is really pretty humiliating to be beaten twice in less than a year by the Habsburgs, and so Charles Albert decides to abdicate in favor of his son, Victor Emmanuel, hopefully giving his son then the ability to continue to rule over Piedmont, Sardinia. Well, the Pope is fairly new to the papal see or to the papal throne. This is Pius IX, and Pius IX is one of the longest serving popes ever. I think he's probably the second longest serving pope after John Paul II, who passed away a few years ago. But from 1846 to 1878, Pius is pope, and he comes in 1846 as a fairly young man for a pope, and he's pretty liberal for a pope as well. He has a prime minister by the name of Rossi. This is Count Rossi, and sadly his prime minister is assassinated by a radical democratic mob, and this mob then he's assassinated by a radical Democrat, and then the mob of Paris forces the Pope to replace him with someone much more radical, somebody who's going to advocate for the kinds of social and economic and political policies that this mob of Paris wants. Pius says, okay to that, but then he kind of steps out the back of the Vatican and he flees to Naples, which is still, relatively under the control of conservative rulers. Well, with that power vacuum, with the Pope gone in the Papal States and in Rome, a couple of guys show up to declare a Roman Republic. This is Giuseppe Mazzini, who is the head of the of Young Italy, an Italian nationalist group, and then also a guy by the name of Giuseppe Garibaldi, who is a kind of professional revolutionary who we'll see coming into Italian history again later on. So these two guys are radicals. They're not in favor of constitutional monarchy. They're in favor of a republic, and they want to be in charge of this republic. And they are nationalists, so eventually they'd like to unify all of Italy. Radicals who are Italian flock to Rome, hoping that this is the beginning of a radical republican Italy, national Italy. Well, French troops at this point in time decide to intervene to help Pius IX. Now, these French troops are sent by the new president of France post-revolution, Louis Napoleon Bonaparte. Louis Napoleon Bonaparte was trying to prevent a unified Italian state under these radicals. Later on, he will be in favor of a unified state or go along with a unified state, but he certainly doesn't want radical people, revolutionaries, doing this. This is also useful for Louis Napoleon Bonaparte as the new president of France. He is helping Catholics, or the ruler of the Catholic Church, and so Catholics in France are going to like Louis Napoleon Bonaparte doing this. So French troops come in, pretty easily disperse the Republicans, these revolutionaries who created the Roman Republic, including both Giuseppe's Garibaldi and Mazzini. The Roman Republic falls, the rebels are dispersed, and French troops remain in Rome until 1870 to support Pius IX. They are there to protect him and to keep him from being toppled from power. Well, there was, like everywhere else, a failed 1848 revolution, at least everywhere outside of France. And when the revolution and its desire for nationalism and liberalism was frustrated, it meant that Italians wanted it even more. So there is this Italian nationalism increasing. At the same time, Piedmont, Sardinia, that failed twice to increase its size and maybe start to create a national Italian state, they too are interested in increasing territory and their power, which they could do, of course, by taking over other places. Austria and France and Pius IX are all against a national unification of the Italian states at this point in time. And the Pope, Pius IX, with this shocking experience that he goes through, turns very conservative. And then the Pope, as the head of the Catholic Church, is going to be a very conservative voice all the way through the end of his tenure as Pope. And then the next Pope is going to be conservative as well and try to continue with conservatism. Well, that's it for today. Hopefully that was short